Species. Unite.
We want to know that we're not separate from all beings. Because most of our grief, our fear, our anger comes from feeling separate, not feeling connected. And we're constantly finding ways to connect.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We have a favor to ask. If you liked today's episode and you have a spare minute, could you please rate and review Species Unite on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts? It really helps people to find the show. This conversation is with Nina Rao. Nina runs an organization called Saving Wild Tigers. They're a project run entirely by volunteers, and they raise funds and they support conservation efforts for tigers throughout India. 3 of the 8 tiger subspecies that roamed Asia only 50 years ago are gone. There are 5 left, and they're all threatened. And so it's urgent that these tigers are protected and stay protected. Nina is also a chantress. She learned the traditional chants from her grandfather in a village in South India when she was a kid. And in 1996, she met Krishna Das. Krishna Das is a singer and chanter, and he's known globally for his performances of Hindu devotional music, which is called kirtan. Nina has chanted with Krishna Das and traveled the world with him since the 90s. And she's a chant leader on her own. She and I spent the day together last week in upstate New York. We hiked, we ate, and we talked. And it was pretty magical. Hi, Nina.
Hi.
It's so good to be here with you in New Paltz. And we've had a beautiful day, had a great lunch, and went on a beautiful hike. So thank you. I don't know what else we're going to talk about because we've talked for a long time.
3 hours.
Yeah. So one thing I've been learning about you, more about you, and this week was that I had no idea that you were a banker on Wall Street back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
It's just funny. It is funny because it's the last thing I ever would have pictured.
Yeah.
You having this former life. So can we talk about like how you got there and then how you left there to get more toward here?
Yeah, for sure. I do have a picture of myself in a suit. I'll show you later. I think as I was growing up, I felt I wasn't really an artist. I wasn't really a scientist. But I'm a good manager, organizer. And I had a pretty good head for numbers. When I went to college, I did my degree in economics. And I left India and came here and looked in the New York Times, in the help wanted section back in the day. And I thought, who wants a degree with economics? So there was a carpet store manager. There was a positions clerk job on Wall Street in a Japanese bank, and various other things that I applied for. And as it happens, a lot of my Indian friends who lived here, were MBAs or investment bankers, or they were in tech, one or the other, or they were doctors. So when they saw the bank job listed, they said, yeah, you should, go for that. So I got the job for no reason other than the person who interviewed me liked me. And I knew how to make a spreadsheet. So this was in the day, Elizabeth, when many things were not automated, if you can imagine. Even on the trading floor of a bank, they were filling out trades on pieces of paper. And then we would consolidate the trades and come up with the P&L at the end of the day. So this kind of worked with my mind that likes to fit pieces together, That's how I got the job. My salary was, can I boast about it?
Yes, please.
$14,700 a year. And I was so thrilled. It was my first job out of college. I was not even 21 yet. I was 20. And I had come with my husband, who was older than me at the time and still is. And he was already an accomplished architect. And so this was my first job. And I felt really proud about that I was out on my own. And then just when I was promoted to be an assistant trader on the desk, I realized I wake up every morning not wanting to be reading what they read every morning. I was just not excited about it. And if you're going to succeed at anything, you have to love it. And it just wasn't what I loved. I loved the people, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I quit.
And did you quit knowing what you were going to do?
No. I thought I would go back to India and maybe open a restaurant, because they didn't have cafes back then, if you can imagine. If you go to India now, there's a cafe everywhere. And I thought, okay, I'll go back, I'll open a cafe, and then people can come and hang out at the cafe, you know. Of course, I read books about opening restaurants and I realized, no. Perishable foods, not a good business. But many things changed in my life then. I was divorced from my husband and I stayed here and he went back to India. And while I was sort of languishing at home, my father moved to New York and he had been living in Nairobi in Kenya. He was working for an airline and was heading up their operations in Nairobi and had moved to New York. And so when he saw me kind of not doing anything, he said, a friend of mine from Nairobi wants to open a safari company in New York. And I know how much you loved being on safari. So a little background of that is that when I had gotten married when I was very young, my husband at the time was a tremendous wildlife enthusiast. And on our honeymoon, we went to Kenya for a safari. And I learned from him what it was like to be in the wilderness in that kind of environment. And just the love, like when I think back now, it lit him up from the inside. And without anything being said, I think that was the beauty of it for me. So when my father suggested it to me, he said, maybe you want to help him set up this company. And I said, well, I have no experience. And he said, he just wants someone he can trust. So I suggested you. I said, sure, let me do that. So I started working for this guy who had come over from Kenya. He had a limited time visa, and we were typing itineraries on a typewriter, if you can imagine. And I slowly started falling in love with Africa again from a distance.
Were you going at this point? Oh, from a distance?
Not yet.
Okay.
And then finally I had the chance to go. And I went on a lot of different trips. So it started off with a simple trip on a minivan, one of those group things. You buy a seat on a bus and you go to the park. And it's something for everyone. So nothing wrong with that. But I really wanted to expand. So I said to him, I can build this business. People are coming to us to go to a safari in Kenya. They're going to want to go back and go to Zimbabwe or go to Namibia, go to South Africa, go see gorillas in Rwanda. Let me go see. So I traveled a lot.
It's incredible. Going to a desk every day to going to Namibia and Botswana and Zimbabwe, it's a pretty big change.
Yeah.
And to see all of that. And also to see all of that, what is this, like the 90s at this point?
Yeah.
Right, pre-internet, where like a lot of people didn't really know what existed that wasn't around them back then. It's weird to think about that now. And to recognize, like, even then, the need for, okay, there's good ways of doing this stuff, and then there's not so good ways of doing this stuff.
That's right.
And because that becomes much more important later, just in general.
Yeah. And now we know that.
Yeah.
All these decades later, now we know that.
Right.
But at the time, Africa seemed like an abundant mother, like nothing would run out. The Serengeti plains would go on forever. Botswana marshes would go on forever. There would be endless elephants. But we evolve. We've seen this history in other countries, like in India, for example.
Yeah.
How long was it going to take for things to change in Africa? And I often don't like to use the word Africa because it's a big continent and there are many different countries and cultures within the continent. So when I say Africa, I'm really referring to sub-Saharan, East and Southern Africa.
Right. You're doing this for how long?
Good question. So that was about 1991 when I quit the bank. And when the World Trade Center towers came down, which was September 11th. And that was 2001. Until then. During that time, I ended up actually leaving that company and starting my own. And I decided I was going to be a one-person operation. And the thing that happened was I was also traveling to India a lot during that time to visit my guru's temple up in the hills of India. And so I understood then, like any place I went to, if I went to South America, I'd go to the wilderness areas there. I like to travel. Adventure travel is what I'm interested in. So I thought, well, if I'm like this, then my African clients are going to want to go to India too. So I started looking into tourism in India. And what I learned there is that it's very different from especially Southern Africa, where a lot of the tourism happens in private game reserves, which don't exist in India. All the wilderness areas are run by the government, by the forest department. And all the lodges and hotels are outside of the park. And so you pay a park fee, which is minimal. And I mean, it's gone up now these days, but back in the day, it was nothing. And the people who made the money were the people who ran the jeeps and the hotels. And sometimes they even brought in staff from the cities. So even the local people didn't benefit from employment, you know. But there were some people who were doing the right work. And so I made it my duty to find out who those people were. And I started by looking in the most obvious of places by contacting someone named Valmik Thapar, who had done incredible work with tigers just as a layperson. He wasn't a scientist, but he studied this area called Ranthambore, which is in Rajasthan, where you can see tigers easily. So he knew that I ran tours. And I said to him, I said, listen, I recognize that me running tours is not directly benefiting the tiger, really. There's a lot of corruption in that area and, you know, people are not respectful of the animals. There's all kinds of things that happen. But I want to support nonprofits that work on the ground who are actually doing the work. And he was also working with Project Tiger, which was a government-run project.
Was Project Tiger to bring back more tigers?
Yes, okay. To protect the tiger reserves in India. At the time that I started looking into all of this, there were supposedly about 2,000 to 3,000 tigers living in the wild in India. But that's a big range, right? It's cutting it in a third here. And there were people who felt that that number was wrong because the way in which the census was conducted in India was using a very archaic system.
So I want to lay out the land in India a little bit for people who don't know. In India, way back in the day, there was millions of tigers and wild animals. And then when the Brits came, hunting became the phenom, right? And almost everybody got hunted, like a huge percentage. But in 1970, you can tell me if I'm wrong, and then I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, sure.
In 1970, Indira Gandhi said, hey, no more hunting.
Yeah, that was the Wildlife Protection Act, yeah. And
pretty much except for poachers and I'm sure corruption, but hunting stopped. Now, I'm thinking about that because I've had a few people from India on the podcast, more than a few, we've brought this up, that hunting stopped. But I've never really looked at it very deeply. Thinking about something like that happening in the U.S.
Yes.
Right, is so impossibly unheard of, right? Like, we love our guns so much in this country, and hunting is such a way of life. But it was in India, too, before 1970, right? When hunting stopped, were people, like, in an uproar over it, or was everybody okay with it?
I think the scale is what's different. I think the culture in our country here in America is really one in which the right to own a gun, first of all, is considered a personal privilege. It's a right. It's not even a privilege. It's a right. It's not the case in India. You can't own weapons so easily. You have to register it. It's a whole thing. And it can only, personal kind of weapons are not allowed. So these are only hunting rifles and things. But also the thing to remember, I think, is that whatever hunting happened, let's just talk about before the Brits came.
Okay.
Much of that was they were not automatic weapons. They weren't even guns. People lived with the forest. They coexisted. They hunted deer. They knew the ways of the forest. And, there were rishis practicing and doing all kinds of meditations in the forest, sitting on tiger skins and deer skins. There was not an unfamiliarity with the wild beings that lived in the jungles. So there was a tremendous amount of reverence and understanding. So I find that a little different than
very.
our generation here, especially in the West. The other thing is that I don't think there was a culture that this Wild West kind of culture that existed. There were certain groups of people who could afford to hunt, because the other thing is it's very expensive. And there was a plus and a minus side to that. Yes, hunting created like for example, cheetahs went extinct because of hunting in India. But because the Maharajas wanted to have this land for sport, and the British Raj as well, they preserved the forest. There's two things happening simultaneously. The land remained wild, biodiverse land, where there was no logging allowed. Wildlife was not allowed to be extricated from there, whether it was birds or monkeys or, baboons or whatever it is for other reasons. So it was they were allowed to live intact. And because India where it is, it's at the crossroads of incredible species coming from Europe and Western Asia, Eurasia region, up to the top of India and then down into India too. So you have lion, you've got tiger, you've got bear, all kinds of antelope, deer. And that's not even talking about the birds that are migrating. And then you have ocean on all sides because it's a peninsula. And then the rivers flowing them from the mountains, from Himalaya. So you have such a topographical range also, right? Mountains, desert, wetlands, rainforest, savanna, everything is happening there. And an insane population explosion.
Yeah.
And somehow it's still the most viable home for the wild tiger. And that comes, I think, from India's reverence for wildlife.
Which is very different than the US. We just don't have the same kind of thing, which is, I think, also why, with or without hunting, in India, there's so much less resistance to coexistence than there is in the US.
Absolutely.
Like, we have coexistence methods here, but nobody wants to use them.
It's unfortunate.
I want to talk about some of the methods that some of the organizations that you work with, like what they're doing, because it blows me away.
When I first started out researching this kind of thing, there were many people who were involved in pure research. And it was very important for them to know what we were looking at. It's all true. Everything is important. In this jungle, what lives here, and is it sustainable for a wild tiger to live in this? How do we know that? So for that, you need to do the type of research to know what prey it lives on, how much water does it need, what distance does it need to roam, to live in, all the things that account for a healthy wild tiger. Chances are, if you have a healthy wild tiger, then everything under that food chain is going to be healthy too, because it can't survive without, from the smallest creatures that live in the stream that's running by to the birds that are flying above. It won't survive in a healthy way without all of that supporting it. So it's a good symbol of that. Now, what also I started to find out about was how people were doing what they called at that time community-based conservation. Now, this is something that Valmik Thapar was doing through the Ranthambore Foundation. They were supporting the people who lived around the jungle. So in some parts of India, the jungle is so remote that there are some very small villages and remote areas that where people live close to the park. But in a place like Ranthambore, you're literally surrounded by villages, there are train tracks, there are roads, everything very close. And somehow still are wild tigers living in this area, including leopards too, and other smaller wildcats. So they recognized that a lot of the disturbance to the land, to the tiger habitat, was coming from the people who lived around the park. And because they had cows and cattle, They needed to raise them, and they didn't have much money. Now, these are all subsistence farmers. These are not the type of farmers that we have here that have tracts of land and tractors, and it's not like that. They have a tiny plot of land. They have their children working the land. They have 1 or 2 cows, and people are carrying around produce on their heads. I mean, it's a very different level. But for them, they didn't even have enough money to have like a concrete house with a door that locked. They're living in huts, mud huts with thatch roofs. So their means of subsistence is is threatened every moment. Leopards come out at night, take their dogs they might have as security, and then the dogs get taken by leopards. Goats, because they have small animals for milk, those get taken. And then a calf, if you're lucky to have one of those. And then, God forbid, your own child. So what the community-based conservation projects are trying to do is, first of all, providing security for the people who live around the parks. So, I mean, they're literally right up against, if there was a wall, and some of them have walls, they live right up against the walls, and they cross over into what are called buffer zones, where they can bring their cattle. And I've been in a buffer zone and actually seen a tiger attacking one of the cows in that buffer zone.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah. So it's not always the best solution, but it's just it's a temporary, like a transitional space and time, so that there's a way in which for the village people to live, but they know their risks. Now, the government does compensate them for those losses. But there's paperwork, like everything else. So, like Kriti's organization, for example, they have a program called Wild Suraksha, where they help to connect the farmer who's lost either their crop by elephants trampling through their farms or a cow, to connect with the government to file the paperwork for them. And she's using technology to make this happen. They've created an app. And now, since everybody in India, they never had a landline, but they have a cell phone, they can use the app to report those kind of damages, and they get the money. And when they feel supported in this way, then they start to understand better what they're doing, that they really are stewards of the wilderness areas. If they don't protect it, there's not going to be trees, there aren't going to be grasses. The rain gets affected immediately. That's going to affect their farms. If all the trees are gone, the climate changes in the area. People are slowly starting to understand that.
Okay, so go back to you for a second. So, because I cut you off when we were in the early 2000s when you started all of this.
Yeah.
And so, how did it kind of expand? Because your life really changed late 90s too.
My life changed a lot. I gave birth to my daughter in 2002. And it was at that point, and also the World Trade Center towers coming down really had a big impact on me. And maybe it was just the timing of everything, and because I felt like I needed to be home with my child. But also the advent of the internet made it such that I wasn't just competing with other people like me who were customizing trips and had an interest. We were now competing with I don't even know who anymore. And I just didn't want to get into that rat race, I felt like I needed to be very connected to whatever I was doing. And I knew I couldn't escort trips having a baby at this point. And so I sold my company to a friend of mine. Then I stopped doing wildlife trips to India at that point. And but I kept up with the work for saving wild tigers, because what I found was that there are people who have estates, that have foundations, that want to actually donate. And they're trying to find the things that are close to their heart. And what I decided was that anything that I do for saving wild tigers is going to be completely on my dime. There would be no admin costs. There are enough big organizations that can sell tote bags or stuffed animals or whatever it is that it takes for them to raise money. I just didn't need any of that overhead. I just wanted to receive the funds and give it directly to the field and be a pass-through.
Well, and also you're the person who can tell people who don't know
Yes.
what kind of tiger organizations
Yes.
to donate to.
Yes.
Like who's legitimate, who's actually
Right.
doing good work.
Yes. And so I spent my time trying to figure out who those people are that I like to support. And I still do.
Yeah.
And so because people know me here and it's a 501c3, it's very easy for them to donate here. And then I figure out how to get the money to India, to the places that it needs to go. And every dollar goes, like, there are no expenses deducted from our organization. And I wanted to keep it that way. But the next level happened when I started talking to people in our community. And there's a lot of discussion about mindfulness and how we make our choices. And now, in light of the global climate crisis and pollution and global warming, there's a lot of discussion about this. And I wanted to find a way to connect from my community that does these type of spiritual practices to conservation of the wilderness.
Talk about your community and your spiritual practice for people who don't know.
So I come from a family in India that, as far back as I remember, my grandfather was an engineer for the British government. And he had a little house that had rice fields and fruit orchards on the southwestern coast of India when he retired. And we would go there for summer vacation. So that was the western part of him. The other part of him was a devotional singer of hymns from the Indian Hindu tradition. I knew nothing about any of that because I grew up with my parents traveling all over the world, living in so many different cultures. My sense of Indianness was all that I really knew from my being at home with my parents, who were trying very hard for us to be westernized too. So they were doing the best that they could for us. And so I wasn't so steeped in the Indian tradition, but because I grew up with my parents, we had that culture, let's just say. So I had chanted with my grandfather as a kid, understood how much I loved it. When we would go on holiday, I read the sacred texts that were on his bookshelf because I didn't have anything else to read. I don't even know why I didn't think about bringing my own books, but I was like, I'm just going to read what's there. And there was no TV, that's what we did. And I realized how much I loved them. Now when I think back, I realize how much I love them. And my grandfather then had a heart condition. He left, he moved to the city, and we never went back to the village again. I grew up, I moved to America, and like I said to you, I traveled in Africa a little bit. And when you're in nature like that, you can't help but tap into the spiritual nature of everything. Whether it's the leaves, the sky, the people who live there, the words that they speak, the sounds that they make, it all starts to feel like home. And I understood that I traveled so much as I grew up that the places that I really felt at home is where I could smell the earth. And that's how I felt when I was in Africa. And the other place that I felt at home was when I heard chanting. Any kind. Benedictine monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks, priests in India, my grandfather. So I went to my first yoga class in 1996 at my gym. And I thought, let me check out, what is this yoga? What is this yoga? This is me. Coming from India, what is this yoga? I was like, all right, I came to New York to go take up my first yoga class because it wasn't mainstream.
After your job at the bank.
Yeah. Never did yoga. And it was in my yoga class that my yoga teacher was playing some sort of spiritual music. I could tell. I couldn't figure out what it was. But I knew that the yoga was really helpful for me. There was something about the breath practice and the exercise was great. I mean, but I was already exercising, so it wasn't really that. There was something about the way in which your mind went when you were doing a yoga practice that was different. And when everybody was doing the same thing, this is the other thing, and you know this as a runner, like running a race with a whole bunch of people, there's a different kind of energy when you do something together, right?
Yes.
So I went to my first yoga retreat, which is now like second nature for me. But and I didn't know what it was going to be about, and there were a whole bunch of like vegan yoginis with tattoos and saying namaste, and I was like, where am I and what am I doing here? But I loved my teacher, and I wanted to be there and honor her. And on the schedule was something called satsang, which is in India is a name for a group of people coming together who are seekers of the truth. I mean, it sounds really new agey, but it's not. It's old, actually. It's something we've been practicing in India for thousands of years. It's just a way for people to connect and to be pointed in the right direction. So in this case, it was chanting of what we call mantra. So anyway, I didn't know any of this. So I saw this on the schedule for satsang, and I was like, Krishna Das. This is a failed Indian musician. This is going to be awful. I don't want to stay for this program. I'm going to sit in the back of the class and I'm going to go to bed. So I sat in the back of the class. He walked in, and he was a 6-foot white guy from Long Island in black sweatpants. And I said, this is worse. This is going to be worse. This is worse than a failed Indian musician. I don't even know what's going to happen now. But he sat down, didn't say very much that I remember, and started to chant. And as soon as he started to chant, as I think back on it now, in what would be a timeless space, I went to the place that I felt as a child when my grandfather was chanting. And it's still here. The space is here now. But I remembered it, recognized it. And it's still the same place. When I walk in the mountains, when I swim in the sea, it's all the same. It's a space of connection. I don't know how else to say it, a space of connection, of presence. You hear a beautiful piece of music. You see a color. You see a flower. You hear a bird. I mean, I don't even know what, it's a place of beauty and peace. These are words that are coming to me now, but I didn't even know what it was then. All I knew is I wanted to be in that space, and there was no other space I wanted to be in. And it was happening because of the chanting. And the chanting was coming from him. So 3 hours later, I found myself sitting in front of him, right in front opposite him. And I don't know where the time went or how I even got there. So over the weekend, we became friends. And for those people who know of Krishnadas, they know now that he's a global phenomenon with fans all around the universe. And I can't go anywhere with him where it isn't somebody who's going to recognize him and be a big fan of his. There were, at most maybe 10 people chanting with him for free on Monday nights at Jiva Mukti in those days. But I knew I rearranged my whole life so I was always going to be on the Lower East Side on Monday night so that I could chant with him.
Wow.
He had one cassette tape that he had given away free. I listened to it day in and day out and day in and day out. But I knew it opened up something in me, that it wasn't just that I had to chant. I saw that there was a path, which is something I never recognized before, that there is a path to follow. It's the path of your own heart. You use your intuition to walk this path, to figure out what's real. And that's what the chanting led me to. So It's been just years of exploration of spiritual texts, going to India, going to the place where Krishnadas met his guru, where he had all these experiences that were unlike what I had heard about, there's a whole thing about cults and gurus, and it was nothing like that. He wasn't telling them what to do. He was just being. And everybody who was around Neem Karoli Baba, Krishnadas's guru, was having experiences because he opened them up. And so even when he left the body, they remained open to that presence. And I was feeling that presence in his chanting because he could tap into that space. So this is the beauty of doing this type of practice. You do it as a group. Everybody has their own experiences, and you go home and you live your life. You don't have to prescribe anything to anybody. There's no any kind of lecture. There's nothing like that. It's all about just being. And so I started reading Ram Das, who was Krishnadas's elder friend and, spiritual brother. And I recognized that everything Ram Das said in his book, starting with Be Here Now, was from my tradition. I had seen these practices in India. I had seen and felt the impact of doing worship, being in a temple. What do you feel? Why do I feel when I walk into St. Patrick's Cathedral that something very sacred is going on here? That sacredness comes alive in worship, in chanting, in meditation, and in music, in art, because you go into that place in your heart of beauty. So Ram Das was able, in his very modern way of speaking, for everyone to understand what was the foundational meaning and import of these practices in just everyday language. And that's what Krishnadas continued to do and still does. And to me, that was the most helpful thing in my life. My life took a turn after that. I understood this is how I can find a way to be happy. So many things changed. At the very same time, I was leaving my wildlife safari business. I had a tiny baby. I was at home, and my friend who had been Krishnadas's assistant at the time, and meanwhile, I'd been chanting with him. I helped him set up recordings and was always there.
Yeah.
And she said, Nina, I need to go do something else. And so since you're not working right now, maybe you want to be his assistant? It's very easy. You work from home. So I said, okay, 12 hours a week I can do. And that's kind of how, I won't say it started, but that's when it moved from me just being a supporter to like actually working for him. And then it's now my whole life. It didn't remain 12 hours a week for too long, just like my first job at the bank didn't remain at $14,000 a year. It all changed very fast, but because everything I do, I find that I just put everything into it. And so we've just been friends and just walking this path together and just, I never aspired to be a musician or ever thought I would have an album, like never occurred to me. But then when he was making Flow of Grace, which is an album of chants to Hanuman, he had heard me chanting at a group thing that we did. And he said to me, he's like, so Sounds True has asked me to make this album and I want to record your melody. So I said, okay, sure. So he said, so I'm going to come over and you record it for me so that I learn the harmonium part, because I taught myself how to play harmonium, which he gave me. It was my first harmonium. He gave it to me. And I said, sure. So I taught him the harmonium part, and then he calls me a few days later and he says, we're going to sing it as a duet, so practice. So I said, okay. And then I had arranged the recording studio and all the choir and everybody who was going to come and sing. And he sang different, like 7 different melodies. And then it was my turn. So he said, okay, we're going to take a break. So take a warm up and we'll come back into the room. So he sat me down at the harmonium. Everybody went out. And then the choir came back in and they were on the other side of the room. And he went and sat with them. So I said, what are you doing over there? And he said, you're going to sing this on your own. He completely tricked me because he knew that I would be too nervous to do this on my own. So he didn't want me to have all these thoughts and he just wanted me to sing it. So I sang it in one take and that's what's on the album. And that was back in 2005. And, all the while I had been chanting at home with my friends. It was something that we did because he was traveling so much. There was no way to chant with Krishna Das anymore. We all had babies and we were all young and at home. So I remembered some of the chants that my grandfather had taught me. And then different melodies were coming to me and I figured them out on my own. And then over time, when people started hearing my chant on that album, they asked me whether I would come and sing in their yoga studio and, that kind of thing. So that's where it has been. I go and sing where I can. I still support Krishna Das. I go out on tour with him. But the scope of everything has changed. It's become a, multi-level kind of a business in a certain way. We have a touring aspect to the business. We have a foundation where he does benefit concerts for people to raise money for orphanages. You came to the event for Sacred Music,
yes,
for Sacred Forests, just whatever. People ask him for help for all kinds of things. And then we also have our own record label, which I set up so that all his music now did not have to go through another label that was taking all his money. And it's all his.
Amazing.
So it's kind of become that at this point. And, he's going strong. He's now in his late 70s. And all he wants to do is chant and be with people. And by grace, his body is in good condition.
Oh, he's incredible. The night recently where I was at your event, and he was supposed to stop at 10, and he just kept going till midnight, right?
He won't, once he starts chanting, it's like, that's all the energy. It's like it refuels him, so he can just keep going. So I feel very grateful, like all these years later. I met him in 96. It's now 2024. I can't even believe where the time went,
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you just took some people to see tigers in India. This is what we're going to wrap with.
Yes.
And I'm just, because your life has been so mixed with the wildlife and conservation and chanting and Krishna Das and all of it. But how does it inform each other? Like your life in terms of conservation and wildlife which was a long time ago, but pre-chanting and Krishna Das in that world, and your much more infused life, right? Post all that.
Yeah.
Did it change the way you see how we treat the world or how we could be treating it differently?
I don't know if it changed it other than to make it clear to me that they're not separate and that the purpose of the spiritual practice and the chanting of mantra is so important because the mantra is a magical formula of its own. It's not something that you understand up here in your mind. It's something that needs to be watered in your heart by doing the practice. It blossoms inside of you as an inner knowing. And what is it that we want to know? We want to know that we're not separate from all beings. Because most of our grief, our fear, our anger comes from feeling separate, not feeling connected. And we're constantly finding ways to connect. So if we can use the practice of mantra or mindfulness or breath practice, whatever that is for you, to feel connected, all you're doing is connecting to your family, connecting to your friends. You just keep widening the circle. And then every being is included. And every being includes every being on this planet. The mantras itself define cosmic forces. We live on this planet that is made up of cosmic forces. That's how things are happening. And so if we can align by the use of the mantra, like I don't even talk about this because there's no need. You do the practice, you hear the practice, and you understand that this is the place where you can rest. And that's all that's required.
Beautiful. Nina, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Beth.
This was fantastic.
To learn more about Nina and to support Saving Wild Tigers, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and can do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like to support the podcast, we'd greatly appreciate it. Go to our website, speciesunite.com, and click donate. I'd like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke, Sam Kosel, and Anna Kolner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.